and I'm looking at the apartheid wall, which runs right next to the refugee camp. Behind the wall, you can see olive trees. Olives, of course, are one of the main crops of Palestine. Who do those olive trees belong to? They belong to residents of Bethlehem, not the refugee camp, but long-standing residents of Bethlehem. And they've got a problem. Olive trees need tending. And there's a great big wall between them and their olive trees. To get to the olive trees, they have to go several miles down that way. Well, they'll find a checkpoint that may or may not be open, and they may or may not be allowed through it to look after their trees. So, they think, to save us going through the trees, we'll ask our boys, it's always the boys of course, not the girls, to set up shelters under the trees so they can be there in the morning and work all day on the trees. But the Israeli border guards say, you don't have a license, you don't have a permit for these shelters, we'll tear them down and send your boys back home if we don't arrest them. So it's difficult to tend the trees. And Israel has a law that says land must be used. And if land isn't used, if land isn't cultivated, it belongs to the state. Not the Palestinian state, but the Israeli state. And much land has been lost like that, where people haven't been able to get to their land, and it's been taken away from them. On the hills above, you see the settlements of Gilo and Hahoma. So this picture's about settlements as well. It's about illegal occupation of Palestinian land by settlements only open to Jewish Israelis. And since this photo was taken, I've been told this land has been taken over by the Israeli state and given to the settlements so they can expand their ways down the hill towards Bethlehem. An awful lot of the story there. Before I go on with the story, I want to sort out three terms: Jew, Israeli, and Zionist. These terms get confused by many people and leads to political confusion. You can be a Jew without being an Israeli or a Zionist. You can be an Israeli without being a Jew or a Zionist. You can be a Zionist without being a Jew or an Israeli. Me? I'm Jewish. Why am I Jewish? Because my mother was Jewish. It's a very intelligent religion, Judaism. Doesn't trust who the father is. You're never quite sure who your father is. You always know who your mother is. So my Judaism comes from my mother and not from my father. What sort of Jew am I? I'm an atheist Jew. But atheists carry a lot of their upbringing with them. An atheist of Jewish origin is different from an atheist of Catholic origin, is different from an atheist of Islamic origin, because we are brought up in a culture. So in some ways, although I'm not religious, I'm still Jewish. But I'm not an Israeli, I'm a Brit, and I think, as will become clear in my talk, in no way am I a Zionist. Israelis. Well, 22% of Israelis are Palestinians. They're not Jewish, and there may be a Zionist Palestinian somewhere among them, I've never met one, but they're not even all of the Jews of Israel are Zionists. the Haredi, many of the religious Jews, the ones in the black coats, are not Zionists. They see Zionism as a perversion. They say Zionism, Jews will return to Jerusalem in the time of the Messiah. And whatever Netanyahu may be, he is not the Messiah. Zionists. We know about Jewish Zionists, but they're not the really scary ones, the Christian Zionists. Who are they? They're fundamentalist Christians who have read their books of the Bible carefully. In particular, they've read the final book of the Christian Bible, Revelations of St. John the Divine. Written by St. John the Divine when he was on Patmos. I don't know what he was smoking, but I wish I could get some of it, because Revelations, beautiful poetry, lousy theology. But it's where all the really good stuff comes about Apocalypse and the 7 horsemen and Armageddon and all that stuff, and about end times. And the Christian Zionists take all this very seriously. And part of the Revelations of St. John the Divine is that all the Jews must be gathered into Israel so the Messiah can come. And we'll have the second coming and the rapture. Now, what these Christian Zionists don't tell the Jewish Zionists is the reason the Jews have to be gathered there is because they will either be converted or they will die. So it's a pretty poor trick they're being played on. And when they're all gathered in, then the saved will rise in the rapture. They will rise, leaving all their possessions and all their clothes behind them to sit on the left hand or the right hand or something of God. It's a problem, because these same people have great difficulty with sexuality and with the human body. And when they all fly out naked, they're all going to die of shame anyway. Anyway, these are the Christian Zionists, and they're very important because of the political support they give. And Christian Zionism actually started not in America, but in this country, although it's most powerful in America. And the Republican right, who give the greatest support to Israel, are also the Christian Zionists. And they see as part of their political religious mission to support Israel, to support the idea of Zionism. Now, the only Zionist, the first one I know about is Lord Shaftesbury, very good at charity in this country, looked after children, there's still charities in his name. He was both a Zionist and, like most of the Christian Zionists, an anti-Semite. One of the reasons was they wanted the Jews to be in Israel, or anywhere, but so they weren't next door to them. So if you can send the Jews to Zion, they're not going to be clogging up the pavements of London or New York or Dallas. So, a bit of history from my father. I may not give my Judaism, as I said, that comes from my mother, but he gave me a lot of good sense. And he told me about the history of oppression of Jews, about the Cossacks, and about the Holocaust, the Shoah, the Second World War, and everything else. But the story he took from this oppression was that a history of oppression gives you a duty to stand on the side of the oppressed, not to become an oppressor in your turn. And he told me, when I said I no longer believed in Judaism, that I am a Jew as long as other people call me a Jew, not as long as I want to be a Jew. So that's a small fraction of what he taught me. But it's important, because it says about why I stand here today. Now, what is this about Jews and Israel? Well, we know that in the Jewish Bible, God said this land belongs to you. This land of Canaan is yours. We'll kick out the Amalekites and everyone else who was there. This land belongs to you. Now, this is quite obvious. In pre-Bible times, one of your functions of your God was to legitimate what you did. And if you had a God who said, this land doesn't belong to you, it belongs to the people over there, pretty short lifespan for a God, you get kicked out until you got a proper one who told you, this land is yours. So you put a quick advert in, do a selection. Does this land belong to us? No, go away. Does this land belong to us? Yes, you're hired. So, pre-modern God says, this land belongs to you. Other pre-modern gods said, this bit of land belongs to you and you and you. So what happened? In England, in 55 CE, Romans come in. What's the result? Romans 4, Celts 0. Celts disappear off to Wales and Cornwall and various other places. A few years later, another round of the battle. Romans 5, Jews 0. The Jewish leadership gets sent away from Jerusalem. Now, what then happens is quite interesting. The Jewish Bible becomes subsumed into the Christian Bible and the Islamic Quran. So, this ancient belief gets a continued life inside the shell of other religions as an other, but as a close and recognised other. It didn't mean there wasn't necessarily persecution, doesn't mean the Jews were always liked, but the narrative continues. And the narrative continues inside the shell of Christianity and Islam. No one picked up the Druids' belief. So there are no Druids around now to say to some guy in Carmarthen, yeah, that house that Mike owns in Brixton belongs to you. And I'd be very miffed if he did. But this myth of belonging continued for the Jews. It wasn't always very strong. And Zionism as a movement only starts in the 19th century as a part of European nationalism. You didn't have an idea of peoples and states until the 19th century. Before that, you had sovereigns and domains. Sovereigns ruled over something and you happened to live there. And if your king was nice, good luck to you. If he wasn't, tough. But it wasn't your country, it was the king's. The idea of people's own land is a part of modernity, a part of the 19th century. And there was this idea to discover Jews as a people. Now, this wasn't a particularly religious idea. It wasn't the religious Jews who thought about this. It was the secular Jews who were part of the Enlightenment tradition. And it was the bourgeois Jews who also very much used it against a growing Jewish socialist movement, against the book. And so we get to 1917. Balfour, a Christian Zionist, wanted American support in the First World War, wanted to get the American Jewish community to put pressure on the American president, draws up the Balfour Declaration, also wanted a British ally in the crucial area of the Middle East. As part of the British imperialist narrative, says, I'll write a letter to Rothschild saying, land of Palestine belongs to the Jews. It wasn't his to give away. It didn't matter. 100 years ago, Europeans had the idea that they could parcel up and give away bits of the world to themselves or to someone else. Just part of everyday life. It's how imperialists work. But part of the Seder service, the Passover service, is this statement, L'Shana Habayah B'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. Now, I think there's two ways you can see this. You can either say, this is an invitation to go to Stansted, get on an EasyJet flight to Ben Gurion and be in Jerusalem next year. That's one meaning. But there's another, I think, a much more interesting meaning, which is the meaning of Jerusalem as seen by Blake. So we are building Jerusalem here in England's green and pleasant land, in England's dark satanic mills. A Jerusalem at a state of grace here and now where we are. And I think, you know, it's as much next year in Jerusalem means next year we will live in peace here in better times, not just grab a few air miles and go to fly to this awful airport. And this gives us the law of return. The law of return says, I, because I had Jewish parents, have the right to live in Israel. What I'm interested in is the right to go back to Shepherd's Bush, but with house prices there anymore, no way I can do that. Set that against the right of return, which is the right of the Palestinians, who were kicked out of their homes in 1948 by the Israeli army and the Israeli militias, to go back to the land from which they were thrown out of after I was born. Before you were born, but after I was born. So that's the context. What's the tactics? BDS. Boycott, divestment, and sanctions. What is BDS? It's mass, non-violent civil society action. What we can do peacefully and within the law to support the Palestinian rights. It's not our idea. It's a response to a Palestinian call by BNC, the Boycotting Committee, which is a coalition of every significant civil society organisation in Palestine. And within that, from PACB, the Palestinian Academic and Cultural Boycott Initiative, which looks at how we deal with what goes on in universities, what goes on in the cultural domain. But I'm asked often, why boycott Israel? Why not all of those other evil regimes you could mention around the world? Whether it's Zimbabwe, whether it's Iran, whether it's China, you can go on forever talking about evil regimes in the world. There are too many of them. First answer to that is there has been no call from the people of those countries for a boycott movement. There's nothing to respond to. The second answer is, it's not about a league table. It's not giving China this many points for arresting dissidents. Iran, this many points for executing people without proper trial. Zimbabwe for organising rape. Israel for doing what it's doing. Until we score all the points for all the evil things they're doing, and the one at the top we hit at. It's not like that. It's not like the Football League. The question is this regime doing things that are criminal enough for us to oppose them in the way that the people who are suffering are asking us to do it? And that's why the boycott is of Israel and not of anywhere else. I say it's mass, non-violent, civil society action. In this, it mirrors what is going on in Palestine every day. Zionists would have you believe that the only things that Palestinians do is fire rockets and blow up buses. No, it's not. That is not the main form of action. But what they are trying to do is produce a link in your mind that goes Palestinian terrorist, Palestinian terrorist, Palestinian terrorist, until it's an unbreakable link, so it can deny the moral force of support for the Palestinians. But this is a list of a few of the places where non-violent resistance is going on. I could have gone on for 6 slides. We have places like Berlin, where the apartheid fence was built through the fields, cutting the farmers of Berlin off from their fields. In fact, on a route the Israeli Supreme Court declared was illegal, but it didn't mean they moved the fence for 4 more years. Nalin, again another village on the wall. Al-Walaja, suburb of Bethlehem, where they want to build a new settlement where Palestinians live. Sheikh Jarrah, a suburb in East Jerusalem, where Palestinians who were displaced by the Nakba, by the disaster of 1948, by the loss of their homes, for many of them the loss of their families, were given land to live by the Jordanian government, and where, on phony title deeds, extremist settlers are claiming the land, kicking Palestinians off their houses and occupying them. We have a situation where there are settlers inside a Palestinian house and the Palestinians are living on the veranda. Story about Sheikh Jarrah. In the autumn, there's an important Jewish festival called Sukkah. And what you do in Sukkah is a harvest festival. You build a tabernacle, a temporary residence outside your home, covered with leaves and hanging with fruit, and you live in the Sukkah 8 days, I can't remember. Anyway, it's a nice festival. So the residents of Sheikh Jarrah and some of their Israeli supporters, a couple of years ago, built a peace sukkah in Sheikh Jarrah. As you go around Israel in the autumn, can't go down the streets, they're full of these temporary sukkahs outside people's homes. But what happened to the peace sukkah? The Israeli police decided it didn't have a permit. No sukkah has a permit. And so, with extreme violence, they destroyed the sukkah and arrested many of the Palestinians and their Israeli supporters who were there. And they did it with extreme violence. Now, what that says is, why are Palestinian homes demolished? They're demolished because they don't have permits. Now, if you were to try to build something in Southampton without a permit, Southampton City Council would, of course, tell you to get registered or they will knock it down. But if you live in Southampton, you have a reasonable chance, providing your buildings fits in with the area, of getting such a permit. Permits are virtually not obtainable for Palestinians to build their homes. So, if your family grows and you need more rooms, you have no choice but to build illegally. And any day you may come home to find the Israeli police, the Israeli border force, have demolished your home. Your child can go to school in the morning and come back to find all his or her possessions destroyed, their clothes scattered, their toys, their drawings, their books burnt. Silwan, just south of the old city of Jerusalem. The Israeli architect, archaeologists, on very thin evidence, maintain that the city of David was in Silwan, and therefore they have to demolish all the homes there, all the Palestinian homes there, to build an archaeological park. The fact that it's someone's home, second order. The Negev, where many Bedouin live. This became a problem after Israel withdrew from Sinai. When Israel was in Sinai, they used to use it for their tanks, for their exercises, because tanks need lots of space to drive around. When they left Sinai, they needed somewhere else to play with their toys. They wanted to use the Negev desert in the south. Problem was, there were Bedouin there grazing their sheep and their goats. So they demolished and continue to demolish the Bedouin settlements. And there is a settlement there, a village there, that has been bulldozed, rebuilt, bulldozed, rebuilt. I think it was about 15 times the last time I looked. But the Bedouins say, this is our home. The Israelis say, no, we passed a law to say it's not, and demolish it. So they rebuild and demolish and rebuild and demolish. Nabi Saleh, another village, contested, and more, and more, and more. Oh.
What's the MSNS? What's the ship there? Yeah, shipping.
Okay, I'll lock that on there. I've been accused, or I and my colleagues, not me personally, of singling out Israel. But I have to ask, who singles out Israel? Israel is not the poorest country in the world by some long measure. But despite that, it is the largest recipient of US aid. Now, we know about the official aid, both the civil aid and even more the military aid that goes to Israel. But what, and we know how many billions that's run to because that's in the US budget. What we can't count is the tax relief given on charitable donations by Americans, Jewish Zionists and Christian Zionists to support settlements and other activities in 48 Israel. Which probably, the value of that tax relief, which is as much aid as checks written by Obama, because it's still American tax dollars, the same foregone tax dollars. It's probably even bigger than the official aid, although we can't make a reasonable estimate. The US at the United Nations. There are many motions condemning Israel in the General Assembly when everyone has a vote. There are not Security Council motions when Israel is in clear breach of international law because the Americans veto it. The Americans don't consistently veto the resolutions condemning the illegal actions of other regimes, but they seem to think that law-breaking by Israel is in a different category. Maybe it is, but I don't understand it. And when the Chinese and the Russians, not for good motives, opposed and vetoed UN resolutions on Syria for criminal actions by the Assad regime, America got very uptight. So how can anyone veto a motion condemning such obvious criminality? They need a mirror. We have Europe. The EU is the biggest commercial partner with Israel. Its trade with Israel is bigger than the Americans. But also, Israel is part of something called the European Research Area. Now this is strange, because I was never very good at geography at school, but I remember the Mediterranean looks something like this. Well, more or less, you know what I mean. And I do remember that that bit was Europe, that bit was Africa, and that bit was Asia. So I've missed Turkey up. I'm very good map. Apologise to any Turks here. And unless they got some bloody great super tankers and dragged Israel across the sea, how is Israel part of a European research area, which is the 27 member states, plus Croatia, Iceland, Norway, Switzerland, Turkey, Liechtenstein, all European countries, or Iceland, an offshore island of Europe, and Israel. It's a bit strange. Now, what's important about the European research area is it's an attempt to normalise Israel, to say that Israel is part of the European democratic liberal tradition. I mean, I know the democratic liberal tradition might be getting a bit flaky in bits of Europe, but I think we can still recognise it. And it's trying to say that Israel is part of that tradition and is not a foreign state like these strange Arab and African states, but like us. And it has another purpose. If you ever go on to do research, I hope some of you will, one thing you'll find is it's really hard to do the research. It's really hard to publish it. It's even harder to get your research used. When it sits there in the learned publications you published it in, it's not available to people. The way you make it available to people is to work with them. And going in a research collaboration with Israel makes the research done here, makes the research done at LSE, makes the research done in Milan available to Israel to strengthen their economy, to strengthen their military. Because quite a lot of the projects under the European research area have indirect military consequences. So Israel, the EU also gives favourable, most favoured nation status to Israeli exports. Doesn't give them to settlement exports, and there's a long history of Israel rebranding settlement produce as 48 Israel produce to try to sneak it into Europe. The EU is getting more active on closing that down, but it's still a big problem. The EU is not just a member of the European Research Area, it's a member of UEFA. And this year, this is 2013, the UEFA Youth Championship is meant to be held in Israel. Again, Israel is not part of Europe. Why is it part of UEFA? Israel is also part of Eurovision. Gives it the right to be part of the Eurovision Song Contest once a year. Now you might think, I might think, this is enough punishment for any nation, but they see it as a privilege. I say, Israel wants to present itself as normal, as part of a country under the rule of law. But the Israeli army and government routinely ignore their Supreme Court rulings. Now when you have a Supreme Court, and the government ignores it, that gives you problems. I may not like the current British government. Here I don't. But when the Supreme Court says something It may moan, it may complain, it may say it's wrong, but it obeys. In Israel, it's just an inconvenience. Not that the Supreme Court regularly gives grief to the government, and good, loyal Israeli citizens, but they do occasionally, because they are lawyers, and sometimes they have to obey the law themselves. I've talked about unauthorised buildings. Settler violence. When settlers burn olive trees, when they attack farms, when they run rampage over villages, when they do price tag, which is, if any part of the Israeli state machine does something the settlers don't like, they go and attack Palestinian property. And the Israeli police do nothing. There is no legal process to bring these people to boot for everything up to and including murder. And there's attacks on NGOs that offer legal assistance to Palestinians. NGOs that support Palestinian rights are routinely harassed and attempt to close them down. It is not a state under law. I don't have anything beyond 2011. This is from the United Nations, and we can see the blue bits are property damage, the red bits are casualties, and you can see how it's increasing year on year. And the 2011 figure wasn't the final figure because this graphic was drawn up in November. And they can do it because they can do it with impunity. So it's not just the occupied territories. I took this photo when I was going through Israel on my way to Palestine. It's in Lud, Lida, near Ben Gurion Airport. Lida, a scene of a major Israeli terrorist incident in 1948 led by Moshe Dayan. Now one of the poorest towns in Israel. Not a very clear photo, the bus didn't slow down enough. What is it? It's Palestinians, Israelis of Palestinian origin, children playing. And what are they playing? They're playing jumping forward and back over an open sewer. The only playground they have. Now, I'm not saying that relative to other Arab populations that surround Israel, that Israeli Palestinians are poor. They're not. But compared to Jewish Israelis, they are diabolically poor. There is less spent on their housing, less spent on their schools, less spent on their hospitals. It's the same story as apartheid South Africa. The black population of South Africa was probably not as poor as the black population of Zimbabwe or Mozambique or Zambia. But that wasn't the comparison. The comparison is with the society they're meant to be part of. And that's why it's apartheid, because of the discrimination. The rooted, systematic discrimination within Israeli society. Still the legacy of 48. Still, not all Israelis, but many Israelis and many powerful Israelis regard the Israeli Palestinians as illegitimate and a problem and someone to be displaced, to go the way of their cousins went in 48. What's the pact we call? The academic boycott group. It's not a boycott of individuals. Despite what showboaters and idiots like George Galloway may have been doing in the last week. George Galloway was not acting in the letter or the spirit of the boycott call. It talks about institutional links. We will not engage with joint products with Israeli institutions. If an individual Israeli lecturer comes to give a lecture on physics in this lecture theatre, so be it. If he comes here to promote the physics department of Bar Ilan University, that's something different. If he comes to talk about his own work as a scholar, it's not a problem. Because the meaning of our actions are governed by the institutions in which they're located. My work has meaning not just because of what I think, but because it's embedded as part of the British higher education system. And those are the meanings that carry with it. The theory is called New Institutionalism. It's a major theory in organisational theory. And Israeli universities are the research and development arm of the Israeli state. There's nothing strange about that. British University is the research and development arm of the British state. Work that goes on at Southampton in the engineering department, I'm sure, supports British aerospace and the British armaments industry. I wish it didn't. I support the campaign against the arms trade as well. That's life. The question is, how are these armaments used in Israel? Are they used for legitimate purposes, or are they used for illegitimate purposes? Are they used for defence, or are they used for oppression? And the answer is they're used for oppression. And the Israeli university higher education system is linked like that with the systematic oppression of the Palestinians. Because Israel is a militarized state. Once you've finished your national service in Israel, you become part of the reserves. You have to. So the professor who teaches you physics on a Tuesday is a colonel running a checkpoint on a Thursday. The graduate teaching assistant who takes your class on a Wednesday is raiding houses, is commanding a platoon on a Sunday. The students are the privates and corporals. Universities are hierarchical, armies are hierarchical, they match. They are not separate. They are deeply linked, which is why we have an institutional boycott. What does it say? It says, we will not publish in journals run in Israeli universities. We will not review for those journals. We will not engage in joint research projects with Israeli universities. We will not attend conferences organised by Israeli universities or held in Israel. That's the boycott. It is not about individuals. And the boycott, if someone comes representing Bar Ilan, it doesn't matter whether they're Jewish, or Christian, Muslim, or an atheist. It doesn't matter whether they're an Israeli, or an American, or a Brit, or an Icelandic. If they are representing an apartheid institution, they are subject to boycott. Not because of their individual nationality, or race, or religion, but because of their links with a system of oppression. And part of the reason we do this is because the systematic way in which Palestinian universities are under the cosh and the limited educational opportunities that Palestinians have. You leave your house to go to your lecture or your exam, and you never get there because suddenly there's a checkpoint on the road between your house and your campus. In fact, you fail your degree because you can't get to the exam. It's of no concern to the people manning the checkpoint. But when people try to visit, to give lectures, they're routinely refused entry. Noam Chomsky had the effrontery to try to enter Palestine over the Allenby Bridge and to give a lecture in Bir Zayt without giving a lecture in Israel. And this was seen to be such an insult. But Noam Chomsky, who in fact is a Zionist, a liberal Zionist, but a Zionist all the same, was turned back at the Allenby Bridge because they have the effrontery to prioritise talking to Palestinian students over Israeli students. So as I say, the central of this is research. There's the EU helpfully produces a database of all joint research projects. Cordis.europa.eu. If you look there, you will find out whether there are research collaborations between Southampton and Israeli universities or Israeli funds. It's not just universities who are part of the research area, it's also private companies, including arms companies. To be part of the European research area, you're meant to have signed up to the fifth freedom, enhancing the cross-border mobility of researchers, students, scientists and university teaching staff, trying to get your transit visas, if you're Palestinian, is really difficult. And often, when people have left, they can't get back home. They've stayed away too long. Israel is in breach of the fifth freedom they signed up to in order to become part of the research area, and we have to keep on pressing the EU to remedy it. So we've got Haifa and Tel Aviv. This stuff on Israeli universities, by the way, is not really making it up. It's stuff from their brochures, stuff from what they sent to their alumni in order to raise money for their activities. And they're proud of it. Hasbara is Israeli propaganda. It's the word they use. And Haifa and Tel Aviv University run courses in how to lie for Israel. The Tel Aviv Review, winter 08-09, talks about 64 projects supporting the Israeli military and claims Tel Aviv University is playing a major role in enhancing Israel's security capability and military edge. Hebrew University of Jerusalem is built upon occupied East Jerusalem land. Ariel University, now Ariel University, I need to correct this. Ariel has been given university status. It's part of Ariel settlement, which is part of a big block in the middle of the West Bank. And its mission is to provide intellectual resources to support the occupation. An illegal university to support an illegal occupation. And it did not meet the criteria that Israel sets for establishing university. It had lower research outputs, poorer teaching programs, poorer research programs than other colleges that sought university status. It was given special status because it was part of the settlement program. My union, the University and College Union, has got into trouble for how we talked about the boycott. It's an area of contest. We are not allowed to have a motion that says we support the boycott, even though we could get that through annual conference with a 75% majority. We've asked our members to consider the implications of working with Israel and to look at their own ethical stance. We've passed a motion on Ariel. We have been accused of anti-Semitism. And in fact, we are waiting for the result of an employment tribunal where a guy called Ronnie Fraser sued his own union because he maintained that the actions of myself and others were anti-Semitic. I suppose he'd call me not anti-Semitic, but a self-hating Jew. If you were to talk to my family, they'd say I have many problems. Being self-hating is the least of them. But it's interesting, they're fond of this phrase, self-hating Jew. But they don't look at where that phrase comes from. The origin of that phrase is a Nazi phrase of self-hating Germans. Those Germans who gave succour and protection to their Jewish neighbours. The Nazis called them self-hating Germans. And they call me a self-hating Jew. An anti-Semite used to be someone who hates Jews. Nowadays, an anti-Semite is someone who Jews hate. They turned the balance of evidence around. What's going on in the UCU is linked to something called the EUMC, the European Union Committee on Xenophobia and Anti-Racism. So I'm trying to, can't even get the initials now. This was a draft working document, actually not written by the EU. It was written by an extremist American Jewish committee and infiltrated into the EU's process. It never became an official document. It's a draft working definition. It's not part of anyone's law. And basically, it elides criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism. Criticism of Israel is not anti-Semitic. It may be. There may be anti-Semites who are critical of Israel, but that doesn't make the actions of the vast majority of critics of Israel anti-Semites. Where to find the anti-Semites? I said, if you find them among the Christian Zionists who are supporters of Israel. Anti-Semitism is okay so long as you support Israel. Anyway, we passed at our last conference a motion saying, when considering accusations of anti-Semitism, we would not use the EUMC definition, because it's actually extremely poor legalese. Brian Klug, professor at Oxford, came up with a much simpler definition. Anti-Semitism is hatred of Jews as Jews, or discrimination of Jews as Jews. I can live with that, and if people do that, hit them with all the sanctions you can. And this is the Fraser versus UCU. The hearing's finished. We are waiting for the results of the tribunal. I'm hopeful they put up a very poor case, but you can't trust judges until they deliver their verdict. Their verdicts are sometimes at variance with what they've heard. It's not just the academic boycott. Although I hope you will look at what's going on in your own university and tax any professors here who are linked with Israel. But there's a cultural boycott, which is a boycott of state-supported cultural troops coming to Britain to perform, because they come to promote not just their dance, that may be very good, but to promote Brand Israel. Brand Israel is their term, not mine. It's this exercise to promote Israel as a normal part of Western cultural democratic society. And that's why we disrupted and got thrown out of the proms last year, why we were outside the Globe Theatre when the Israeli National Theatre was performing Merchant of Venice in Hebrew there during the Olympic Theatre Festival, why we protested Bathsheba, the dance troupe, when they were on tour recently. And we also tried to persuade artists not to visit Israel. They are well paid to visit Israel. We sometimes wonder whether the fees they are being paid can possibly be recouped by the ticket sales, and whether there's not a subsidy coming from somewhere. We don't know. We have strong suspicions. And we try to persuade them not to take these large amounts of money. Now, some artists, like Paul McCartney, are so hard up. They need the money, and they go. Others, like Elvis Costello, like the Pixies, like Gil Scott-Heron, said, no, no matter how much you pay us. We will not go and perform in an apartheid state. I put up Stevie Wonder there, sorry, so we did this slide last time. Stevie Wonder was going to do a gig in Los Angeles to raise money to support Israeli soldiers. When he was taxed about that, he said he hadn't realised who the gig was in aid of, and he withdrew. And that was because a lot of us wrote to him, wrote to his managers. There are websites, Facebook pages devoted to this sort of activity, something that you can get involved in. There are artists who are doing a European tour and then going on to Israel at the end of the European tour, and we can leaflet their fans when they perform in the UK. We've got Red Card Israeli Racism, which is the campaign against UEFA youth competition. UEFA are beginning to think they may have made a mistake, but they've not backed off yet, and there's talk about the next Women's Football World Cup being held in Israel. We need to keep the pressure. Sorry, European Women's Cup, not World Cup. It's UEFA, not the World Body. UNESCO. Oh, this is why boycotts work two ways. When UNESCO said they would recognise Palestine as a member, the Americans pulled all their money out of UNESCO. They thought political support for Israel was more important than the literacy work that UNESCO does in poor countries, the educational work it does. Why should the Americans care whether Ethiopian children learn to read when they can support Israel instead? We don't have anything like the power of boycott. Our opponents do. Boycott, where did it start? Boycott started as a number of groups. The big boycott effort that our current one is based on is the boycott of South Africa during the apartheid era, called for by the ANC. But there are other histories. When we're told off for doing something so rude as to shout above violins, we have to remind our Zionist opponents where we got the idea from. And where we got the idea from was the Jewish campaign against the Soviet Union to allow Jews to leave the Soviet Union. And they systematically disrupted Soviet artists when they played in Europe, when they played in America, in order to draw attention to the plight of Soviet Jews. And if they weren't cultural vandals, why are we? Say, when they come, the contract they sign to get money from the Israeli state, the service provider, that means the artist, is aware that the purpose of ordering services from him or her is to promote the policy interests of the State of Israel via culture and art, including contributing to creating a positive image for Israel. Now, I'm not making up this stuff. They publish it. But the service provider or artist will not prevent himself or herself as an agent, emissary or representative of the ministry. So, promote us, but don't tell anyone that you're doing it officially on our behalf. Consumer boycott. This is something that everyone can get involved in. British supermarkets stock Israeli produce. Sainsbury's at the moment is full of Israeli peppers. Sometimes it's difficult to find a non-Israeli pepper in Sainsbury's in February and March. And for those of us who see this as an essential part of our cooking, it's a real problem. But One problem is there's too many targets, and we decided we had to be selective on our target. We had a workshop last November, and we said our priorities were agricultural produce, Eden Springs water, Soda Stream, which has factories and make their soda wotsits in settlement factories. So those three products in this country, and companies operating in settlements and in Israel. Veolia, who have big contracts in Israel. They've been responsible for building the Jerusalem tramway, like railway, which links West Jerusalem with the settlements. That's part of locking the settlements into the Israeli state. There are no stops on it as it goes through the Palestinian villages on the way. It just takes up their land and their road space. Also, they have waste contracts, and they have a terrible record of collecting waste from 48 Israel and dumping it outside villages on the West Bank. They don't care. There are no regulations for waste dumping for the Israelis in the West Bank. All sorts of regulations inside 48 Israel. And G4S, who run privatized prisons in Israel and are responsible for the maltreatment of Palestinian prisoners. Both Veolia and G4S have contracts on many university campuses. I don't know who has the waste contract at Southampton. They're specialists in clinical waste and dangerous waste from laboratories. That's what they specialise in on campuses. Work with your student union. Find out if they have contracts here. Try to get them banned.
It's a big...
What?
It's a different company.
Different company.
Yeah,
okay. And G4S often do security on campuses. I mean, it's quite clear with Veolia. If they stop working with Israel, we'll call off the boycott. G4S is a problem. They're a criminal company in so many ways that even if they pull out of Israel, until they stop killing deportees from the UK and various other things they're doing, we probably still won't do business with them. We'll deal with that problem when they leave Israel. If you want to know who's involved, Coalition for Women for Peace in Israel run this website, Who Profits. And some people will say, oh well, we'll boycott settlement goods, but not goods from 48 Israel. Well, on one level, we don't want to reject people who are starting to make a stand, and if they've seen half of the picture, they'll see the other half soon. But what you see if you find the Who Profits site, there is no significant Israeli company in 48 Israel that does not source from the settlements, does not have factories in the settlements, does not work with the settlements in some way or other. You cannot boycott the settlements without boycotting the whole of Israel. Tourism. It's a large currency earner for Israel. But it's difficult to visit the West Bank. So you get to Ben Gurion, and you get taken around Jerusalem, you get taken to Masada, you get taken to various other places, to the beaches. I'll talk about the beaches in a second. It's impossible to visit Gaza. Getting a bit easier to get across Rafah, but until the Egyptians start behaving like a civilized country, you're still going to have problems getting into Gaza in any direction. That was the Islamic University of Gaza when I was there, just before Cast Lead. If I'd taken the photograph 2 weeks later, all you would have seen would have been a pile of rubble. It was largely destroyed in Cast Lead. Why was it destroyed? Because people in the chemistry labs might have been learning how to make explosives. It's what chemistry labs do. It's what chemistry labs in Southampton do. And if that's the grounds for bombing a university, then Tel Aviv University and Haifa University and Ben Gurion University are all legitimate targets. And I'm not saying they should be. I'm saying the logic has to work both ways, because that's where the arms industries are developed inside Israel. If you go to Israel and you want to visit Bethlehem, as many people do, many Christians do, see the Church of the Nativity. I've seen it, it's not that impressive. What happens? You get picked up from your hotel in West Jerusalem, you're driven on a coach to Bethlehem, you're dropped at the door of the Church of the Nativity, you get 45 minutes to look around the church, you're picked up again, you're driven back to West Jerusalem. You do not contribute to the Palestinian economy. You do not buy from the traders, you do not eat in the restaurants, you do not stay in the hotels, because crippling the Palestinian economy is what it's about. Who will the boycott influence? Influence Palestinians. When you're living under oppression, you need to know you're not alone. And actions that we take here are known in Jenin and Ramallah the same day because of Twitter and Facebook and email. When I was doing the same things on South Africa, people in Alexandra or Crossroads never found that I got pissed on a wet December afternoon in Holloway saying, "Don't buy Outspan oranges." If I do the same thing outside Sainsbury's saying, "Don't buy Israeli peppers," I can tell them as I'm doing it. That's interesting. When I first started doing consumer boycott, I was very nervous, as we all would be. What will the reaction people be? Am I going to get attacked? Are people going to laugh at me? No, they don't. I mean, some people do, of course. But the vast majority of people are supportive and want to talk to you and want to know why you're doing it. And if you're well briefed, they learn a lot. You know, we can go marching through London. I do that from time to time. And I shout at the windows of empty office buildings. And not once has the window of an empty office building taken a stand against Vietnam or South Africa or Israel. When I talk to people outside on Clapham High Street, they do move, they do change, they do listen to me. Demonstrations are great for meeting our mates, keeping up our own self-confidence, but they don't influence anyone. Talking to people does. Our supporters in Israel, we do have supporters in Israel, need to know they are not alone. Our Israeli opponents. If I talk about Millwall effect, I don't suppose people know what I mean. But Millwall football team, South East London, very aggressive fans, used to chant, "Everybody hates us and we don't care." It's a bit of that reaction from loyal Israelis. But we've tried everything else. We tried talking to them, we tried writing letters to them, we tried petitions. And after 65 years, we might say this isn't working. Boycott they listen to. And BDS gets covered in the press like nothing else. And we're helped a lot because our opponents overreact. When Brooklyn College in New York invited Judith Butler, who's a very leading American intellectual, Jewish intellectual, and Omar Barghouti, who's one of the leaders of PACU, to speak, all hell broke loose. And they were rounded down once by Alan Dershowitz and all sorts of other people, and Foxman, the leader of the Anti-Defamation League, and New York City councillors, councilmen trying to curry favor with their electorate, started saying, if they will have these anti-Semites on our campus, we're going to cut off their funding. They are so overreacted. This got covered in New York Times and the entire mainstream American press. And it forced the American press to talk about boycott because of the actions of our opponents. in a way we could never get them to do by our own actions. Now, they may not have agreed with the boycott tactic, they're entitled to disagree, but they saw the actions of these people who said there is no academic freedom for anyone who criticises Israel as illegitimate. European public opinion. We're trying to change people's ideas in Europe so we can change the attitudes of European governments and the EU. To end Israel's membership of the European Research Area, to end the favoured treatment. Because our colleagues in America are trying to do the same with US public opinion, to change the US government. But until Europe changes its position, there is no way the Americans will. Our leverage over Americans, and it's the pipeline of money from the US to Israel that keeps the Israeli economy going. Our way to try to break that pipeline is by changing attitudes in Europe. What's the aim? It's not one state or two states or 37 states. It's Palestinian rights and justice. How will this be achieved? I don't know. Because until negotiations start, we don't know what the result of negotiations will be. Now, it seems to me the only way this can happen is one democratic secular state. But why ask me? I would have said, right up to the end of the 1980s and into the 1990s, the only solution for Ireland was a 32-county socialist republic. But what happened when the Catholics and Protestants of Northern Ireland sat down and talked was an entirely different solution. It may not be perfect, but there's far less killing going on now in Northern Ireland than there was. And it's a way of getting through to tomorrow. So what the solution, it's not about the state solution. It's about, does it guarantee rights and justice? And how long will we do it? Until BNC tell us the job is done. What's that graphic? That's in the Jericho Desert. That's where Jesus went wandering around for 40 days. This point during Lent, this time of year. And that is a Bedouin home that was in the wrong place. There was a border guard, Israeli border guard firing range over the hill. They'd already moved once up the hill so they could extend their firing range. And now they said they wanted the firing range bigger again. And they said, no, we're not moving. And so that's what became of their homes. That's what home demolitions looks like. Is it a state of all its citizens, Israel? Not yet. When I was on the bus from East Jerusalem to Ramallah, I took this photograph. Buses from East Jerusalem to Ramallah, the only people who travel on them are Palestinians and a few internationals. Jewish Israelis don't travel. But it's a civilized country. You can't smoke on Israeli buses like anywhere else. And what language is that in? It's not in the language of the people who travel on the buses. It's in the language of the colonizers, of the oppressors. It's denying people the right to talk and think about themselves. Sometimes people will talk about genocide in Palestine. I think that is totally wrong. It's not genocide as we understand it in Rwanda or in the Holocaust. There's something much more subtle. In Kimmeling's words, an Israeli political scientist, it's policide. It's an attempt to prevent a people recognizing itself as a people, to organize itself politically, to imagine and plan and build its own future. And it's that destruction, that policide, is what we see going on. So, criticism of Israelis is not of itself anti-Semitism. But false claims of anti-Semitism normalizes anti-Semitism. If you tell people that for not buying peppers, they're being anti-Semitic. You lower the barrier of entry to anti-Semitism. You normalise anti-Semitism. And that makes my life more dangerous. That makes the life of every Jew in France or in England more dangerous. Because it says to people, don't make a distinction. And people say that, I must be hung for sheep as for a lamb. If not buying peppers is anti-Semitic, why not burn down a synagogue? Because it's the same thing. It's very, very dangerous. And our opponents play with fire. Israel likes to present itself as a humane society. It's riddled with racism. There have been anti-black pogroms in South Tel Aviv, and they said it was about illegal immigrants. Whatever you think should happen to illegal immigrants, vigilante action to beat them up in the streets is not what you do. But they didn't bother to check people's immigration status. And so black Ethiopian Jews were also dragged from their cars and beaten up for looking like an illegal immigrant. Couldn't happen again. Arson in Jerusalem, burning down Palestinian homes, burning down mosques. When I talk about South Africa, it could have been a quote from apartheid era South Africa, and that's not surprising, because Israel was the last best friend of apartheid South Africa. The fact that South Africa was run by people with a demonstrable Nazi past didn't stop their alliance. So anti-Semitism doesn't matter so long as you support Israel. And the arms and defence collaborations between Israel and apartheid South Africa kept both regimes going. It doesn't belong to white women, of course, only white men. So Ethiopian Jews are also attacked. Israel's claim that its existence makes Jews safer. The historical evidence is that it increased the danger to all Jews, Israeli and non-Israeli. Because there is a whole anti-Semitic tendency among parts of the Muslim communities, which one can see where it comes from historically. It's still wrong. It's still the wrong reaction. Still an anti-Semitism and Islamophobia are two sides of the same coin. And to hear Jews talking in Islamophobic ways is as distressing as hearing Muslims talking in anti-Semitic ways. A couple of nice things to finish with. When I was in Gaza, I was in the school, and I found what I felt a really inspiring bit of English exercise. Soon, Palestine will be taking its own place in the economy. Students in Palestine will be living in a community of nations. Future continuous, they say, maybe future optimistic. But these young people and their teachers still, even in Gaza, even on the brink of Cast Lead, believe in civilization in the future. We've just got 3 questions to finish. If not now, when? If not this, what? And if not us, who? Thank you. I overshot my time like mad, didn't I?
Would you like to take questions?
I'd be delighted to take questions. There are questions and discussions. That's the exit from the Hebron Old City. That's what a checkpoint looks like. So there's a slide with the URLs in, which I was doing too much casework today, didn't manage to print off anything, but I will send you a copy of the slide so you can circulate the useful URLs to people. Go in the back.
I was just going to say...
Speak loud.
I heard you saying that what you need is negotiation, people to come to the negotiation table. But doing all this, for example, boycotting Israeli goods, I mean, what good will it do as long as you have the United States and countries like the United States supporting Israel? It doesn't seem to be... I don't know, maybe you know more about this than I do, obviously, but is it actually having an effect?
Yes. I mean, partly it's a negative answer. If not this, what? That we have to change the balance of power. In the end, it will be about negotiations. The question is, what will be the terrain of the negotiations? What will be the balance of power in the negotiations? Things always end up by talking, in some form or other. And if there is to be a future for anyone of the region, we have to talk. What we are trying to do is change the political climate so that the Israelis will negotiate seriously and not put so many ridiculous preconditions that make negotiations impossible, but they will back up from the settlement project that makes any Palestinian identity almost impossible. Because I didn't really understand settlements until I went on the road from Bethlehem to Hebron. I could have told you all the facts about it, but I didn't understand it until I drove along that road. Hillside, settlement, hillside, settlement, hillside, settlement, hillside, settlement. They're not occasional things on the West Bank. They are everywhere and they dominate. They're on all the high ground, controlling the low ground around them. Just like if you go around Italy, all the hill forts.